Somebody give Max Verstappen a round of applause. Somebody give Lewis Hamilton a bow. And somebody give Lando Norris a hug. This was just a 2 hour trail of anticipation, drama, thrill, tragedy, and glory of almost Shakespearean proportions. And this is just a bundle of every possible human emotion wrapped up into a 2 hour masterpiece. And we've got the job of reviewing just this right here today on the Inside Line F1 podcast and Pits To Podium. And so, rather dauntingly, here's the list of contents. Lando Norris, was this one of the best endings to an F1 race ever? And why did he do what he did? The outrageous Lewis Hamilton century put into context. More on Max Verstappen and actually how he just was very sneaky and has got himself right back in the championship fight. Of course, after that, we get to the stats review by Sundaram, and he's got some really strong stats in this one. We discuss the other strong finishers from the Russian GP and answer all of your questions that you've sent in on social media. So thank you so much for sending them in. Let's get into it. This is going to be a big one. This is going to be a fun one. So join us as we review the 2021 Russian GP, which as the name suggests, might not be as boring as you think it was. Let's go. Kunal, scintillating, fascinating, amazing, jaw-dropping, tragic, gut-wrenching. I'm running out of superlatives to describe Formula One right now. Can you help me out with them?
Yes, I think you actually used a superlative which I've heard nobody use before, Shakespearean. And I think that literally sums up the Russian Grand Prix. And trust me, I remember when we did our preview episode, we were just like, okay, guys, maybe our episode on this podcast and our video channel is more going to be more exciting than the race itself. But oh my God, Formula One has been delivering blockbuster races one after the other. And for the last 3-4 races, the narrative has just shifted from being only Max versus Lewis. It's McLaren in the mix, it's George Russell, it's Carlos Sainz and Ferrari and Fernando Alonso, and it's epic. And before we move to Norris and Hamilton and Verstappen and everyone else, my simple view is the Russian Grand Prix was actually 2 races in one, all right? And most of us are only going to remember the last 5 laps of the Grand Prix, because clearly it was extremely exciting. But even the 48 odd laps, if my math is correct and if I remember the total number of laps we actually had of racing, those were pretty fascinating as well. There were stories, there were narratives, that were battles opening up all up and down through the corner. And wow, I don't know, where do you want to start, Soumil?
I don't even know, Kunal. It's amazing that it takes just one simple thing to change the entire race. And it's not like the first half was boring, as you rightly mentioned. We could have gotten an amazing Lewis versus Lando fight on the track for the lead. We didn't, but more on that in a second. But the rain, Kunal, just a simple element that can change everything up. And the fact that it came in from one part of the circuit, didn't hit the other one, this is... Christopher Nolan, you've met your match. You really have. I don't have anything else to say.
It's interesting. And, I remember it was Rubens Barrichello. Was it sometime in the 2000s? He started 18th. It was Hockenheim. Half track was dry. Half track was wet. And he actually came on to win the race. Now, you guys already know my history is not as good as Soumil's, right? So he's probably just going to correct me out here. But I just love these. This is classic Formula One for me. Certain parts of the circuits are dry, certain parts are wet, and drivers are constantly wondering, is it the right time to switch? Some of them are risking what Lando Norris did. Some of them are risking what Bottas and Perez and the likes did, who were quickly onto the inters. So yes, the rain really, really added to a different level of fun. Thankfully, it just didn't give the win away to a particular driver or any driver. It just added so many elements to the mix. Max Verstappen starting 20th, finishing second. Who would have thought, right? And all along, we think it's been Lewis who's been lucky in the Drivers' Championship. And voila, suddenly Max's luck also started to shine. And I think okay, let's do this, Soumil.
Mm-hmm.
let's stop beating around the bush and let's get to Lando Norris. Apart from giving him a hug, is there any suggestion, any advice you'd like to give him, given that we are all armchair critics and keyboard warriors, and all of us is everyone's out on Twitter saying he should have put it, he was entitled, how could he say no to the team? What's your view? You've commentated on several races, like hundreds of them.
Yeah.
What is your view?
To put it simply, it comes down to what you're thinking in that moment. And in one way, you'd be very proud of his self belief to say that I can do this. But at the same time, you also have to wonder his self belief was sort of partly hidden away by the fact that he didn't know what conditions were coming on, right? Who would have forecasted that so quickly we would have so much rain in all the other parts of the circuit as well? And had it stayed as it were in the first couple of laps when Lando decided to stay out, then it would have perhaps potentially been a Lando Norris win because things were looking okay. But the fact that it changed so quickly, it was a point where McLaren had committed to staying out, and then things turned on them. Even Hamilton was reluctant. He said that, yeah, I don't think that's the right decision, but he still went ahead with it. McLaren gave Lando the chance. It's a sign of trust from the team. I'm sorry, and you love to see that. But I guess in this case, it's just a matter of judgment, and I wouldn't even call it bad judgment or something like that. It's just such a heat of the moment decision, and it's actually leading into a very interesting question we've got from Siddharth. He says, how difficult is it to make a call for inters when the conditions are changing? Siddharth Shah, of course, one of our very avid listeners and viewers. That's the point, Kunal. You can't tell when it's such a critical moment and there's a 7-time world champion behind you. You obviously back your instincts, and your instincts say you can do it. But clearly, the conditions turned away from him very quickly.
Soumil, you hit the nail right on the head, right? And I would say one of the first things Lando's done is he's owned up to his mistake. So he admits he made a mistake. And hey, guys, we all make a mistake. How many of us own up to it, right? Of course, Lando then said that the team did not tell him that more rain was coming. We don't know the truth to that. Probably the team actually did not tell him that, and that's why Lando did what he did. And just how difficult is it for Lando Norris or any driver to make such a decision? Hey, when do I switch to the slicks, or when do I switch to the inters? Sorry, and uh, in the case of Lando, for all the other 19 drivers, it's a little easier, but not for Lando. He had track position. He had the lead. He had Lewis chasing him down for victory. He was staring at his, first win after scoring his first pole position. So it's that factor was a little more difficult, which none of the other 19 drivers faced, mind you, right? And then it came down to the fact that his gut said, I can drive on slicks in this weather. And guys, remember, Formula One is what it is today because of gut, because of what Soumil said, instinct. It is their gut that makes them drive those cars so quick. It is their instinct. It's not an engineer necessarily. It's what you feel on your lower back, just above your bum, right? That's what makes you drive faster. It's that gut that tells him, I can drive in these conditions. If these conditions stay as it is, I will drive. I will. If it's difficult for me, it's difficult for Lewis. We'll figure a way out. And let's not hold Lando Norris, just because he trusted his gut, literally. And let's applaud the fact that he trusted his gut. And, of course, it didn't work out. But hey, so many times in our lives, it doesn't work out as well. And now I'm going to sound philosophical, right? But when it doesn't work out for us, and I don't know all the celebrities who tune into our show, but when it doesn't, work out for us normal listeners and speakers, right? Our mistakes are not broadcast on live TV across the globe for millions of people to dissect and give comments on. Yes, inexperience. Daniel Ricciardo actually turned around and said, for me, no way I could have driven. So I made the decision to go on to the inters. Again, it was easier for Daniel, given where he was. So he will learn from this mistake. Exuberance, the excitement, I'm in the lead, I don't want to let go of it, all of those things. But wasn't that literally the joy to watch? Because, and I know I'm going on and on, I know I need to give some airtime as well, but Imagine the other scenario. Imagine if Lando would have pitted and Lewis would have stayed out,
Mm.
right? Then suddenly we would have been like, great, Lewis's 7-time world champion experience, 100 race wins of experience made him stay out. So, the tables can turn either way. And just one last point, right? When could have Lando or should have Lando pitted? I think his best bet was pitting just when Lewis Hamilton pitted, right? That's conventional racing logic. Right? You just pits the next lap, and you're probably least impacted by then because Lewis is going to figure his tires out and so on and so forth. But I must say that conditions literally got so worse within one lap. And when you look at the tire history of all the drivers, there are drivers who pitted 2 laps later, like Fernando Alonso, and then he suddenly lost out on a lot of positions. So it was
Mm.
literally that moment. And Fernando said it was more on luck than on talent when it came to making the last 5 laps work in your favor. End of point. Thank you, Soumil.
That was such a good point. It really nailed on the head, in my opinion. And I think that genuinely somewhat answers the question that we had from I Know F1, who asked that Norris lost because he lacked experience. Put DR in a similar situation and he would know how to bring it home. Is there something Norris needs to learn in order to be a race winner? I think that would be a bit harsh considering how the circumstances were. And also answering Lenia's question. And it's such a pleasure to see Lenia sending in her questions all the time. She's such an avid listener. Lenia, thank you for the support. And she's asking, why did Lando not listen? Just a case of that, just a case of the gut. And coming to that point, Kunal, Lewis Hamilton also said that he thought that staying out was the right decision. The instinct was the same between a 7-time world champion and Lando, who's actually hunting for his first win. You can't blame him for the instinct, just that he went away with his own decision. Fine, happens. But every good story needs a certain amount of tragedy. Look at how George Russell bounced back from Sakir. This is literally the same parallel situation. Can you really blame them for that loss? Can you blame George for Sakir? Can you blame Lando for this one? To a degree, but not that much. And look at how resilient George has become after that race. Look at how much different he is. In fact, we will speak about him a little bit towards the end of this episode because he's, of course, gotten more points for Williams. But the point is, this will just be a growing experience. And what is a good story without a little bit of tragedy in the middle, right? That's just how it is for Lando Norris. But if you have to remember one thing about Lando from this race, don't remember the ill-fated decision. The fact that he was able to keep Lewis Hamilton behind for so long in the lead up to those last 4 laps, Kunal, we genuinely couldn't tell if Lewis was actually going to get ahead. And that from such a young driver is just tremendous.
And that coming from a McLaren, Mercedes
Yeah.
customer team, I think it was either way, the win was on for Lando Norris. And yes, tragedy, you put it really well. It was tragic to see Lando Norris spin and then lose those seconds. And, what an epic 100th race win for Lewis. But before we sort of still move on, just some more thoughts on Lando. I mean, everyone's being harsh. Everyone's trying to say he was entitled. He said no to the team, etc. There are so many times that drivers just disagree and do what they want, and yes, the team needed to sort of give him more information, be more assertive, etc. But even the team knows that the driver knows the conditions the best. Somebody like Daniel Ricciardo said on his radio, and I was on the radio channel, guys. Okay, so I literally watched the race with every driver's radio, right? Daniel Ricciardo said it's actually better where I am, and this is when he was driving around the last 5 laps, than where you are, where you are, which was the indication to the team that, it's probably drier where it was in the pit lane. So all in all, great learnings for Lando, fantastic entertainment for all of us, and just goes to show that this is exactly what we love about Formula One. And yes, I'm sure Lando's
Yeah.
going to bounce back. He's been the story of the season, and he will continue to be one, hands down, my driver of the day, even though he got the decision wrong, Sommel.
Yeah, seriously, as I said at the start, give him a hug, maybe give him some milk as well. I think he likes that quite a fair bit. But tell you what, give a bow to Lewis Hamilton. 100 wins, Kunal. 100. Let's put that into context for a second. Michael Schumacher, the greatest ever, according to many, including you. I can't tell because I haven't watched him, so Lewis for me is the greatest. But 10%, nearly 10% more wins than Michael, and that's only going to grow. That's nearly 4 times the win as Jackie Stewart, as Jim Clark, as Niki Lauda. That is nearly double the wins of Ayrton Senna and Alain Prost. This man, I know you will tell me that the races now are much more in the calendar and there is more opportunities to win and that X team is more dominant than any team ever was, but still, 100 Grand Prix wins, Kunal. Many said that Sachin's record of 100 centuries wouldn't ever be broken in the world of cricket. Now, this seems to be the new benchmark in the world of Formula One, and it is slightly frightening to know that this record is only going to get better because he's not even close to dipping down. Anywhere close to that. What a driver,
I,
seriously.
I think, firstly, what you said, Soumil, is very true. We need to applaud the fact that we saw history in the making today. 40, 50 years down the line, when you're still listening into us, there'll be new listeners and say, hey, we were there. We had an episode where we commented on Lewis Hamilton getting his 100th win, and it's taken some time to come. It's taken him 4 races to get to his 100th and so on. And I think phenomenal win. It was. We all said it's going to be a Mercedes track, but Mercedes were far from dominant, I would say. And also remember, Lewis did not have the cleanest of weekends. He hit his front jackman on Friday. He hit the wall in qualifying on Saturday. I was just wondering what else is he going to do on Sunday, but he drove a flawless race. He had hammer time working for him. He ignored the team a couple of times as well, like he said, but then he made the call when he had to. So I think it's fascinating to see history being made. You may or may not like the driver, and that's fine. We all have our choices, but applaud the fact that there is somebody going out there and maximizing all his chances, because that's what I really love about Lewis Hamilton. He is maximizing the fact that he has the most dominant team and car ever in the history of the sport. And guys, again, it's something we would all love to do, just keep dominating in our fields of life and be the best all the time. So that's what I really look up to Lewis for. So hats off to Lewis Hamilton. Again, the better part was Mercedes did all they could with Bottas's tactical power unit change, getting him down close to Max Verstappen. But like I said at the start of the episode, Max got lucky and he finished P2 as well. So
Yeah.
I love the fact that we still have a close championship fight despite such a crazy race, despite Max Verstappen taking a power unit penalty. And Mercedes must just be wondering, Max took a power unit penalty, but he still lost the minimum points in Sochi. They put Bottas out there, but he was barely he could barely offer any resistance. And he said he just could not follow cars to make an impact. And then third of all, it rained, and typically when such crazy races happen, actually the rain worked in Max's favor. So all in all, Max is, back to riding his lady luck.
I see what you did that with there. There's an interesting question that's come up. I think this is one from my apologies. This is one from Lenya, who's also sent in one, saying, "Do you think Hamilton will take a new engine in Turkey?" Of course, very topical, considering Verstappen taking an engine penalty this time out, and Bottas's, of course, failed attempt to sort of hold back Max Verstappen, which was mocked by Valtteri on social media, by the way. He posted a meme saying Valtteri with all his other spare engines. It was clear, right? It was clear that Mercedes knew the threat of Max, but they still couldn't do much about it eventually. Hindsight, of course, more powerful at the end, but there's a genuine chance that Lewis will be strategizing a lot with the team about where to take that power unit. And Kunal, honestly, where can you take that power unit? You genuinely can't tell what would be the right place to do that, because right now, even a circuit like Sochi, it would seem to be the most docile of them all, has produced such a masterclass of a race. You really can't predict in that case. It's just a gamble. If it works for you, it works.
I wouldn't want to be in the Mercedes strategy room, making the decision about when should Lewis take his fourth power unit, right? So I'm sure, Toto's been giving all those hints. Maybe we need one, maybe we don't, etc., etc. And I think Red Bull did fairly well in taking it here. They had a 3-place grid penalty, which of course got overwritten with the power unit penalty and so on. So if it's coming, I'd love to see what and how Lewis, makes of it when his power unit penalty comes, if at all.
But still, Kunal, before we move on to Max 100, I don't know. That is such a powerful number. 100 GP wins. I know I'm stressing on it too much, but you saw what one win meant to Lando Norris so much today. That man has 100 of them. Seriously, just something else. But let's talk about a man who's going to make it very hard for Lewis to get any more than 100 wins. It is Max Verstappen. Kunal, you spoke about Max for a little bit, about Lady Luck going in his direction and the rain really helping him out. That was sneaky from Max. And all things considered, in this championship, even though Lewis has had a very spectacular win, of course, partially by luck in a way, because of Lando's indecision. Again, can you call it luck? Can you call it just good decision from Mercedes? Whatever. We've discussed that in the first few minutes. But the fact that Max was still there, even in the most tricky of races, to come up into P number 2, this is, of course, on paper, it doesn't seem like a big win for Max. But seriously, if there's one race that has kept him heavy in the championship, this is it.
It's absolutely correct. And Soumil, I'm reading my tire data, right?
Uh-huh.
I have two interesting points to actually share. First is the trio that was 1, 2, 3 yesterday in qualifying, which suddenly surprised all of us, had used up all their intermediate tires. They had no new sets. So Carlos Sainz, Daniel Ricciardo as well, of course, and Lando Norris and George Russell all had used intermediates. And even though George Russell made the switch at the right time, he just had no grip because he had used up all his intermediates, right? We, of course, don't know about Sainz and Ricciardo because they weren't engaged in battle after switching onto those intermediates. So interesting, again, that teams like Mercedes, teams like Red Bull had kept a fresh set of intermediates for themselves because Max, Lewis, Checo, and even Valtteri had fresh new intermediates, including Fernando Alonso as well. So that's point one that I wanted to make. The second point is the fact when drivers actually made the switch. Remember at the start of the episode, I said it was literally that one lap, the lap after Lewis Hamilton, while Lando Norris couldn't come in, for example, right? So Max Verstappen pitted 5 laps to the end and he sort of shot himself up. Checo Perez pitted 3 laps to the end. Okay, so the difference literally was those 2 laps about how heavy it went, what Fernando Alonso was talking about as well. Fernando Alonso, again, pitted 3 laps to the end, right? And why am I stating this? I'm just saying how narrow the window was to make the switch. Now, guess Lewis Hamilton. Hamilton made the switch 4 laps to the end, right? So just such finer margins. And of course, it's easy for us to look at this data and say it now. But imagine they made these decisions in real time. Lewis knew Max had shifted before he actually decided to shift onto, his intermediates as well. So very, very fascinating to dissect this race. And Soumil and I do this literally even more so than what you actually hear us. So if you want to get in deeper, please just reach out to us on Twitter or on Facebook, and we'll be happy to take you guys through with this.
Yeah, it's more of Nityanand than me. I just need to study more of data, right? It's something that'll help me in life. Shouldn't be the most topical thing right here. What should be topical is the fact that the window was so close that drivers like Kimi Raikkonen made their way in. George Russell also in the points. Alonso, as you mentioned, Kunal and P number 6. We'll talk about them in depth later on, but it's such an interesting point you mentioned about the midfield. There was just battling everywhere. Russell, of course, started in P number 3, worked out well for the early going and then dropped off. But of Sergio Perez is one point I actually have to bring up because there's this one interesting question that I think we have got right here from Manav. He's asking, did Perez pass his peak for the season? He's missing on so many podium opportunities. Fact is, he was on for a podium. Even though he had a slow pit stop, which cost him around, I think, 6 seconds in the race eventually, had it not been for the rain, Sergio was, if I'm not mistaken, in P number 3 when that happened. P number 3 or P number 4. He was just getting there. And as you rightly mentioned, Kunal, that window was so narrow, don't think you can really put the blame on him from finishing where he finished, which was eventually P number 9. So all things considered, a very good race for Sergio. But do you think he's reached his peak for the season?
I don't think he's reached his peak for sure. he's driving in a state where all he has to do is help Max, and that's a different mindset. Because otherwise, when you're driving, or when he was driving at Force India, all he had to do was maximize his race potential, not maximize his teammates' race potential, and that's maybe the difference. And I think he drove a fairly good race, and maybe Red Bull decided to pit Max before to give him track position. Could be several other reasons why Checo decided to pit later. So it was just one of that. I think Checo Perez drove a good lap, good race, keeping the first part of the race before all the rain came, keeping Lewis in check, keeping with Lewis, and so on. And at the end of the day, it's just a different environment that he's still probably sort of getting used to, Soumil.
Yeah, uh, yeah. The environment bit, I don't think so. It's been long enough for an entire Formula E season, basically, and Formula E drivers get kicked out of their seats within a year or two or something like that. So I don't think environment would be the thing. I'm very critical of Sergio Perez right here. I'm not very honestly impressed with the way things are going. I want more, but today you can't really put the blame on him, right? When things were normal, he was performing really well. But it's still alarming to see Max come from so far back and finish in P number 2. That was stunning from him. Tell you what, though, speaking of stunning things, let's move on to some statistics. Here is the stats review by F1 Stats Guru coming up right now.
All right. Never imagined that I'll actually say this one day, but we had a crazy Russian Grand Prix with or even without the rain. This is definitely going to be a race that we talk about for a very, very long time. And I personally love such sort of races because it's very challenging to find stats at times, but these sort of races usually come up with a very interesting bunch of stats. So let's do the stats review of that crazy Russian Grand Prix. Let's get the main ones out of the way. Lewis Hamilton becomes the first driver to take 100 race wins in Formula One, the only one to reach the triple figure mark. Now, these you seldom see a car, a driver, or a team dominating a sport for so long, and we don't really know if this record is going to be ever broken. But eventually, if it does, that's going to be a sight to see if it ever happens. Mercedes have taken their eighth consecutive victory at Sochi, which was already a record last year, but that streak continues to go on. And next year, it's going to be the last race at Sochi before they move to the next venue at St. Petersburg. So yes, Mercedes continue to have that record for the longest winning streak at a particular circuit. I mentioned about milestone races in the stats preview. I mentioned that all the milestone races in the hybrid era, the 900th race, the 950th race, and the 1000th Formula One race have all been won by Mercedes. Well, the 1050th race also goes to Mercedes, and they are a team that particularly like Sochi. They like milestones. So let's see how many more they can actually take before someone else goes ahead and becomes a dominant force in the sport. All right. Lewis Hamilton becomes the first driver to enter the 4,000 points mark in Formula One. Now you will argue that the point system has changed over the years, and this isn't really a fair statistic or an accurate one. But what we did is we corrected all the points that any driver has ever taken in Formula One, and we corrected it to the 2021 point system, and still Lewis Hamilton leads by a very big margin. So he would have been on 4,413.5 points if we corrected it to the 2021 point system, and coming close in second would be Michael Schumacher with 3,961 points. Uh, Over the years, obviously, the cars have become a lot more reliable. Cars back then had a lot more retirements, which is true, which also affects the number of points that drivers would collect over the career. So Lewis Hamilton has had just 27 retirements in his career, while Michael Schumacher, who is in second, has had 68. That also is something, a factor when calculating all these points. Lewis Hamilton has 5 wins in 2021, but the interesting thing that is the number of laps that he's led in those 5 races. So let's do it. In Bahrain, he led 27 of 56 laps. In Portugal, he led 34 of 66 laps. In Spain, 12 of 66 laps. In Great Britain, 3 of 52 laps. And today in Russia, 3 of 53 laps. So, except for Spain, none of the other wins this year have come from pole. So, it goes to show that he's really, really having to work hard whenever he has to take a race victory. And in all these races, he's barely led 50% of the laps. And for example, in Russia and Britain, he's just led 3 laps, the last 3 laps of the race. So it goes to say so much about the driver that Lewis Hamilton actually is. Like I mentioned earlier in the stats preview, pole isn't the best place to start at the Russian Grand Prix. Lando Norris almost clinched it. I have to say, he almost clinched it if it wasn't for the rain, that because that really ruined his chances uh, of becoming the first pole sitter since Nico Rosberg in 2016 to win the Russian Grand Prix. So that unfortunate streak still continues, and Lewis Hamilton won the race today, starting fourth, and he becomes the only driver to win the Russian Grand Prix after starting lower than third on the grid. And the last one is George Russell scores points once again. He scored points for the fourth time in the last 5 races, but something that I've been keeping something that I've been keeping for the end is that George Russell has scored 16 points in the last 5 races, the exact same number of points that Sergio Perez has as well in the last 5 races, driving a Red Bull, a championship contender car. And it's very astonishing the slump he's had ever since that Azerbaijan Grand Prix, ever since his French Grand Prix where he was on the podium. Ever since then, he's had a slump in form in terms of race finishes and in terms of points. So he really has to get it, get up and start scoring more points if Red Bull really want to win the constructors' title. So yes, that was the stats review of the Russian Grand Prix. I'll catch you guys in the next one.
Baffles me, this guy. Seriously does. Again, it's just F1 stats guru. It's in the name, you know why he's called himself just that. And there's a reason why everyone is also calling him just that. But there's something about Lewis Hamilton that's baffled you a little bit today, Kunal, has there?
Yes, there is. And, you know, hundreds win, and I don't know if I've said enough about him, but one thing that's always baffled me about Lewis is that he's one of those drivers, and of course, there are several of them, but he stood out today as well, where he is able to drive to a strategy and make it work, even if it evolves along the race, even if it evolves along what Mercedes planned for him. And pretty much there is all in strategy, which is why teams say it's target +8 or plan A, plan C, etc. And all these things they need to memorize before the race, right? So that's the one thing that really stands out for me. And his of course his driving talent, but his ability to make a strategy work in his favor, Soumil.
That's why he's one of the best, ladies and gentlemen. That's why he gets paid so much. And I was just thinking about it after qualifying yesterday. That's one of those sessions where you justify your salary. And it's crazy to see like someone like Lando Norris was one of the star performers of that, along with Carlos Sainz. So let's actually speak of Carlos Sainz a little bit more. It might feel a bit harsh on our part to include him in a category that's called the other strong finishers from the Russian GP and have a picture of Carlos Sainz and Fernando Alonso right there, but because most of the narrative has been focused around Lando Norris and Lewis Hamilton, we have to do that. But all things considered, Kunal, we were doubting, of course, at the end of the first stint whether it was a good decision from Ferrari to actually make sure that Sainz pits early on, doesn't go for the longest stint, goes for the two-stop. But in the end, it worked. He was at the right place at the right time, made the right decision, and there we are. That's Sainz's third podium with Ferrari this year. He is beating Leclerc very well.
Who would have thought, right?
Yeah.
Literally, who would have thought? I loved the way, Carlos Sainz took the lead of the race and was just getting up there before Lando sort of came back to him. And there's this new air of confidence around him, especially. And guys, remember, he was literally shown the door by Renault at that point, and McLaren were down in the dumps, and they had no option but to take him as well. And then this whole thing about there was no Spanish driver in the Spanish, market, which is big. That's what's kept him. Red Bull let him go. And I think Carlos Sainz is driving extremely well. I love listening to his radio. Very, very measured, very calculative. I'm sure it's with the genes that he's born with, Soumil. And at the end of the day, he made the right call when it came to the tires. He pitted 5 laps to the end, that magic number, which literally worked out for everyone else, Soumil.
Yeah, and he was making it work even though his stop in the first stint was far from ideal. He just got passed by Perez before we got the rain, but he was still in P number 4. All things considered, dragging that out of that Ferrari. My word, Sainz was excellent. And as I said a minute ago, it's in those wet sessions where you justify your salary. And Carlos Sainz did that just right there. There's one from Manav who's asking that, does Carlos get enough credit / acknowledgement for his performances from the fans? It's a bit of a weird one. I don't think I've ever met a Carlos Sainz fan. Now, everyone likes him, but he's nobody's first driver. If he keeps on driving like this, my word, everyone's going to buy Carlos Sainz t-shirts by the end of the year. He has just been stunning. And I think it should. I think we should put more respect on his name because he's one of the very few drivers to come into a new team this year and actually beat their teammates clean and convincingly. So that's one of the very more beautiful things. But Kunal, big performers otherwise as well. Fernando Alonso, P number 6, George Russell, P number 10, and Kimi Raikkonen, P number 8. Who would have thought? As I mentioned at the start, Nolan needs some competition now.
Some very exciting results all through the top 10. I think George Russell just ran out of grip, like I said. Otherwise, he would have been on the charge as well. Kimi Raikkonen, I think it could have been another Alfa Romeo as well. And interestingly, Antonio Giovinazzi pointed out that through the entire race, he had no radio. And can you imagine a race like this where you do not have radio, when you need support from your team, right? And also in Giovinazzi's case, it's a little unfortunate because it's a very crucial time of his career. There's a question mark on his seat, which is why it's not been announced yet. And to have a race like this where he would have probably been in the points, etc. And mind you, he crashed earlier on the weekend as well. So Giovinazzi was good. The one standout, which baffles me again, and I'm hoping I got the data wrong at some point, Yuki Tsunoda, before taking on the Inters, he actually had the soft tire compound for 2 laps. I don't know if that's just wrongly tagged, by the FIA, but he had 5 laps to the end, he was on soft. So when the others were on Inters, he actually ran soft. I will clarify that when I get more data. But yeah, just that. And Fernando Alonso, something about him really, really stood out again because he was up there. He made the reverse strategy work. He was on the hard. He was pushing. He was genuinely looking for a top 5 finish. And then, like I said, in the end, he pitted 1 lap too late, which is why he finished 6th. And otherwise, he would have probably been higher up there. And phenomenal performances, especially when you consider that Ocon is 14th, Soumil.
Exactly. And the second stint, Alonso, after he pitted, was flying in the slicks, I mean to say. He's such a good driver, such an exciting driver, such a fun driver to watch. But before we move on to discussing more of our audience questions, and there are so many good ones, and thank you so much for sending them in on social media, folks. Really makes our heart feel warm. We have to discuss one of the misses of this race as well. Aston Martin, Kunal. Do you reckon had it not been for that skirmish a few laps from the end that they would have finished much higher than where they did actually? Where were they? Vettel 12th, Stroll 13th. Had it not been for that light crash that they had there, this could have been so much better, especially for Lance Stroll.
It could have. And, yes, that skirmish happened. And Sebastian Vettel was one of the types who said it was a misunderstanding. And thankfully, there was no damage. And Lance Stroll actually had a very good very good first half of the race because he was, he was up there in the top 6, top 7 as he went along. And I remember what Vettel said after the race. He said, we gambled on the wrong option to stay out. So again, it was one of those things where you made a decision a bit too late. And, the rain just kept coming harder. And I remember Aston Martin had a very prophetic radio message saying, Seb, the rain is coming. It's going to get worse before it gets better. But of course, they sort of, just couldn't get the timing of that decision right, I would say.
It's going to get worse before it gets better. What else do you expect would happen, man? Honestly, but still, yeah. Of course, it gets worse before it gets better. Of course, that is what it is. But hey, more on some fun questions that you've sent in on social media. Let's actually discuss this one from Vismay. Thoughts on all Mercedes' engine teams? Wow, articulation is important, man. Thoughts on all Mercedes engine teams' improved performances after the summer break? It's been a bit of a good turn of events for them, and I wouldn't pick them out generally because of Mercedes' engine being better. It's just that each of them have had good performances on the whole. Would you point that out on the engine, Kunal?
It's never just a thing that typically works. It's always a package. And interestingly, Soumil, given so many narratives, one key thing we've forgotten to speak about: slow pit stops. We
so
had
many
just
of them.
so many of them that, and they're all saying it's this new directive that's come in, and the human element is more, and so on. And it's a bit puzzling that teams A haven't figured it out. And I hope this is not what the new directive was going to do, that, make a 2-second stop, go 4 times slower into an 8-second stop or thereabouts, because different teams had the same issues, seemingly so.
Yeah, and that's what our expert data analyst Nityanan was confused about as well. Why is this happening? What's going on? Bit of a weird one, that one. Finally, we have got a few interesting ones again. This is one from Sai the Thief, who's also a very active listener and viewer of us, so thank you so much for sending that inside. Will McLaren be competitive this time in Saudi Arabia without engine penalties to all the others? Saudi's a bit of a long shot, isn't it? It's a bit hard to tell right now. I wish we could say, because historically you can look at a team's record at a certain circuit and maybe just get a good inkling, but really can't tell with Saudi. That's a long way off. But without engine penalties, McLaren were good in Imola. Monza, I'm sorry. My apologies for that one. You see which my favorite circuit is. But still, all things considered, Kunal, this does seem to be a genuine challenge from them. And Saudi might be a bit far off, but we can consider McLaren for some good results by the end of the year.
I'm going to quote a very famous motorsport commentator. I'm going to say the name of the commentator after I quote him.
Uh-huh.
He asked a couple of days ago, and he actually asked me, and I had the privilege of, having this chat with him. He said, should we just consider McLaren to be strong everywhere?
No.
Right. And I was like, yeah, that's a very, very nice way of putting it. And the commentator's name was, of course, Soumil Arora. It was on our preview show. Yes, you actually asked him. He put it so nicely, saying, is it time to just think McLaren's going to be quick everywhere? And I think so. Absolutely. McLaren, they won the last race. They took pole this race. And Lando Norris, of course, was joking, saying, guess what? We're up and dominating.
Yeah, don't call me a great commentator, but it's really exciting to see McLaren doing what they are doing right now. Wrapping it off with a few more questions. One from Vismay again. Shouldn't the FIA be more strict on Pirelli considering their data isn't the most reliable? Kunal, you have a very good reason for that. And what is that all about? Why does that happen?
So Pirelli's data is based on simulations because, of course, they don't have a running racing car, right? Yeah. So they have simulations which say that the soft tire will go 20 laps and will degrade at this rate, and this is how it's going to perform. When the teams actually get that tire, they use it in the real world. And let's remember, the teams are always wanting to stop as few number of times as possible. So that's where we hear about tire management, right? So if Pirelli says if you do 1 minute 5 seconds lap for 20 laps, you're going to, that's the life of the soft tire, for example. But guess what the teams do? They'll do a 1 minute 8 second lap, and then suddenly the whole tire utilization goes out of the window, or the tire simulation goes out of the window. So it's not really Pirelli that has to be blamed. They are just showing you simulation data. In fact, this is something Pirelli has brought forward for the 2022 tire as well. That's why they're getting teams to run their mule cars so that they as in Pirelli can get more real world data than just rely on simulated data.
Had it been the year 2001 instead of 2021, they would have just gone for endless testing, endless data, endless miles, and there would have been 2 tire manufacturers, extra wastage. Let's actually come to the final and the most infuriating question and the point of the day. One from Manav, and he's so right with it. Should we rate Disney Plus Hotstar's HQ, by the way, the Indian broadcaster for Formula 1, for Lance strolling the last 3 laps of the race? We should send an air raid, send thousands of troops right there, just destroy the whole building, I swear. What happened in the last 3 laps, in case you're not aware? The screen went blank. There was just that multicolored old thing that you saw when you just maybe don't put the cable in the right way. That is what we saw for the last 4 laps. That is when the rain came in. That is when Lando went wide. We saw that. We come back on and Lewis Hamilton wins his 100th Grand Prix win. This is just, again, stuff just happens. Maybe just added to the moment. Maybe we all got a minor heart attack here in India, all of us watching. But yes, if that's on the plan, do it in the dreams, not in real life. We don't want any lawsuits or anything quite like that. But folks, such a fun episode, all thanks to your question. Such a fun episode, all thanks to the great racing. Thank you for listening. Thank you so much for watching. And Kunal, we get to do this all over again in the midweek.
Absolutely, Soumil. Look forward to talking to you and presenting yet another blockbuster episode in a few days' time. Thank you so much.
See you folks for the Turkish GP at Istanbul. Watch our preview right here on the Inside Line F1 podcast and Pits To Podium. Until then, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.